Throughout World War II, there were many different, horrific and brutal women who arrived at the concentration camps to learn how to become sadistic guards and overseers who would be remembered in history for their evil actions. Women such as Irma Grazer became known as a beautiful beast, and they would exhibit terrible violence and beatings upon the defenceless inmates of camps such as Bergen-Belsen, Auschwitz and Buchenwald. During the war, there were many female prisoners who found themselves held under lock and key by the Nazis. Many of these were civilians who were targeted for extermination. To keep the destructive cog of the Third Reich turning, thousands of women joined the SS retinue to work, and they became female guards for many reasons, including financial ones, as they could earn more money within the concentration camps rather than doing their normal job. One of the most harrowing concentration camps was Stutthof, in the city of Gdansk, and around 65,000 of the 110,000 prisoners who were held there succumbed to the conditions. There were many women sent there from the local area and all around the occupied lands, and they died from starvation, epidemics of disease, a lack of healthcare, the extreme labour, and also murder at the hands of the guards. One woman who was attracted to work inside of Stutthof was Ewa Paradies, who became known for her evil actions, and she was a terrifying female guard. She worked inside of Stutthof for only a brief period, but her crimes would come back to haunt her, as she was brought to trial at the end of the war to answer for the terror that she inflicted. Paradies was brought out to her execution on the 4th of July 1946 in front of a huge crowd. There were thousands of people gathered to see her, and a number of other women who were executed on the colossal gallows structures which had been specially constructed to give everyone a good view of the macabre proceedings. Today we look at the execution of the female guard of Stutthof who battered female inmates. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Ewa Paradies was born on the 17th of December 1920 inside of Liborg, which was at the time inside of the Weimar Republic. It's considered that she had a relatively normal early life, but like many men and women were in the 1930s, Paradies became attracted to the ideas of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. Many young women inside of Germany and nearby countries became politically aware because of the cult of Hitler, which emerged in the 30s, and many women inside of Germany became indoctrinated from a young age. Teenage girls joined the League of German Maidens, or the BDM as it was known. Girls aged between 14 and 18 joined the League proper, and they were taught how to become mothers and how to run a household. Hitler and the Nazis dreamed for women to have as many children as possible for the Reich and for the Empire, creating a population boom in which young men would then be raised to fight for the army, and young women would repeat the cycle. The League of German Maidens had over 4.5 million members at its height, and through this young girls were brainwashed into Hitler's policies and what the Führer wanted. During the Second World War, the girls of the BDM were told by their leaders that during the invasion of Poland, that Polish people were subhuman who deserved to be ruled by Aryans, and Ewa Paradies of course had grown up inside of Poland. She was considered an ethnic German, and someone who would, by the standards of the Nazis, be considered a young German girl. During the war, girls of the BDM helped out as nurses in hospitals and conducted other work and roles, but some who had been heavily indoctrinated would become members of the SS retinue. This was a collection of women who were, when called upon by the SS, asked to perform certain roles. One job they did was to work inside the concentration camps, and female guards were called upon as the camps were expanded because of the huge numbers of people who were being arrested, seized, and taken by the Nazis during World War II. Female guards were accepted from lower and middle classes, and they did not need any form of previous experience, for example working in a prison. Many women came from different walks of life, from being hairdressers and teachers, and even some who worked on the railways were attracted ideologically and financially to work within the concentration camps. Lots of women were recruited locally by the SS, and this included Ewa Paradies. She would have noticed a local advertisement in the city of Gdansk or in her hometown, and she then answered the call to serve inside the local concentration camp. In Gdansk in particular, there was a shortage of female guards who were working in the local camp of Stutthof. Many of the other guards had been sent to work at camps such as Auschwitz, as these were expanded and they grew in their prisoner populations, and for this local women were targeted to go and work at Stutthof. They were not conscripted into it to begin with, but Ewa Paradies accepted this offer, and she arrived in August 1944 at the Stutthof Concentration Camp to train how to become an Aufseherin or female overseer. Stutthof Concentration Camp was the first Nazi camp established outside of the German borders, and it opened on the 2nd of September 1939, and it would also be the last camp to be liberated by the Allies. There were around 110,000 prisoners who were sent to Stutthof during the time that it was in operation, and it changed significantly during the war and also expanded on a colossal extent. In January 1942, it became a regular concentration camp, and there were different parts to the site. There was the old camp surrounded by a tall barbed wire fence, holding 8 barracks and also rooms for the SS guards, but the new camp was created, surrounded by an electrified barbed wire fence, and this had 30 barracks, and also a gas chamber and crematoria were built in 1943 to carry out mass exterminations of the prisoner population. The camp was staffed by German SS guards, and the first female guards arrived at the camp in 1942, and in total around 295 women worked there. The conditions of Stutthof were extremely tough and brutal, with dozens of thousands of people dying from starvation, disease, and also at the hands of the guards. Lots also died from the typhus epidemics that swept through the camp, and if the prisoners were not fit enough to work and conduct hard labour, then they would be sent to the camp's small gas chamber, where they were killed. Executions continued throughout Stutthof's time in operation. For example, in 1944, 4,000 prisoners died inside of the gas chamber, in the camp, including many women and children, lots of these being selected to be slaughtered by the female guard force. The prisoners were forced to work incredibly hard, and many German companies utilised the slave labour workforce, and the inmates were ordered to do the work that benefited the German war effort, making armaments and parts for Luftwaffe aircraft. Because of all the terror, roughly 65,000 people died at Stutthof. Ewa Paradies underwent the training process at the camp, and she was schooled by more senior women as to how to treat prisoners. Women were turned to become monsters by this sort of training and learning, and they were ordered to treat the inmates with utter contempt and to keep them constantly in a state of terror. For example, the infamous Irma Grazer, when she arrived at a concentration camp to train, actually apologised to one prisoner for standing on her foot, and she was then berated and screamed at this by the senior guards, and she was turned into a murderess who would without reason pull out a pistol and shoot prisoners randomly. Ewa Paradies underwent this same form of training at Stutthof, as did other women that she trained alongside. The training period went on for a matter of weeks, and she was made a war dress, and she would be working at the camp guarding prisoners and keeping an eye on groups of women who were working incredibly hard every single day. Paradies quickly gained a fearsome and notorious reputation for herself, and she was overseeing groups of female prisoners, and they did not dare to look her in the eye as she walked past. She was known for violently inflicting pain and suffering onto the inmates with her own hands, and also with a collection of weapons such as her whip. If a prisoner did not work hard enough, Paradies would smash her with her whip, and she would then get more ruthless if the desired outcome of more work did not occur. One former prisoner of Stutthof Concentration Camp, who witnessed Paradies' brutality firsthand, later claimed that she ordered a group of female prisoners to undress in the freezing cold of winter, and then douse them with ice-cold water. When the women moved, Paradies beat them. This sort of punishment was performed upon groups of women when one inmate had done something that the guards deemed was wrong. Cold water torture would have inflicted possible hypothermia upon the prisoners, and it was incredibly dangerous, and many inmates during World War II died from this sort of treatment that Paradies directly inflicted upon them that evening. Despite this reputation, in October 1944, Paradies was moved across to one of Stutthof subcamps named Bromberg Ost. Here all of the prisoners were women, and they worked on the German railway, loading cargo, repairing and clearing tracks, and also digging ditches. It was very tough work, and other women guards such as Herta Bofer and Gerda Steinhoff worked alongside Paradies. Whilst here they got involved in the selection of prisoners to be sent to the gas chambers back in Stutthof. If an inmate was said to have been too sick to work at Bromberg Ost, then they would be sent back to Stutthof to be immediately killed. Paradies was then later moved back to the main Stutthof camp in January 1945, where she picked off where she left. But as the Second World War was coming to an end, there were large-scale evacuations at Stutthof, and prisoners were sent on death marches. These began when Paradies was at the camp, and many of the inmates were sent towards the sea, where they were then shot by machine guns, which had been set up on the beaches, and also many were slaughtered en route to their destinations. In April 1945, Ewa Paradies accompanied one of the final transports of female prisoners, who were being sent to the Lauenburg subcamp, and she then abandoned her position and post when she realised that at the end of the conflict she would be hunted as a major war criminal. She was quickly captured, and it was confirmed during her interrogations that she was indeed a concentration camp guard, and Paradies was then later brought to the Stutthof trials to face justice. She was one of a number of female guards who were accused of crimes against humanity. Inside the courtroom, the women, who included Paradies, Jenny Wanda Bachmann, Gerda Steinhoff, Elizabeth Becker and Wanda Klaff, did not take the proceedings seriously at all. They laughed when evidence was given, and they seemed at times more concerned with flirting with the guards than what they had actually done. Ewa Paradies had a number of witnesses who testified directly against her, and they told about her actions inside of Stutthof and also the subcamp, which included the selection of prisoners to be exterminated in the gas chamber. For her crimes, Ewa Paradies was sentenced to death, but her execution ordeal would be one of the most public and shocking executions in the post-Second World War landscape that dealt with World War II war criminals. On the 4th of July 1946, Biskupia Gorka Hill in Gdansk was filled with thousands of people who had come to see the executions of the guards of Stutthof Concentration Camp, which was nearby. That day there were 11 former guards and carpos, or prisoner functionaries, who worked at the camp, condemned to death by executioners, and constructed with huge sets of gallows. There were 5 of these, including a triple gallows, and they were so big that they allowed all the civilians to see that justice had been carried out. The women were executed first, and Ewa Paradies and the other women were brought towards the gallows. They were walked there, and parked underneath the huge structures were a number of trucks which had open backs. Ewa Paradies was helped up onto the back of the vehicle, and stood by her was an executioner, a prisoner who had been locked up inside of Stutthof Concentration Camp, who was given the power to execute the guards who had caused them much suffering and misery, and some of these executioners were even dressed in their camp uniform. The first executed that day was Jenny Wanda Bachmann, and on the same gallows next to her, Ewa Paradies would be executed, and she was stood underneath. She was executed on the same gallows as Bachmann, and Paradies on the back of the truck was allowed a brief sit down on a stool, and an official then read the death sentence out aloud, telling the whole crowd what specifically she had done to the prisoners inside of Stutthof Concentration Camp that warranted her execution. She was then told to stand on the stool, and the executioner passed a noose around the top of the gallows, and then secured it around the neck of Ewa Paradies. A few moments passed, and then there was a knock on the top of the truck, a signal, and the vehicle drove forward, leaving Ewa Paradies swinging wildly from the gallows. She kicked and struggled for air, and for a few minutes tried to fight for her life, before her fight was no more, and her body then went still and rigid. Later, after all the executions had been carried out, including the men who were executed that day, the bodies of the female guards were cut down, and then placed in a coffin, but today their location remains a mystery, as does their fate. Were they buried or were they cremated? Ewa Paradies was the final woman of the Stutthof executions to be hanged that day, and she was someone who inflicted misery and suffering upon so many people inside the concentration camp where she worked briefly. She also was responsible for many brutalities and crimes, and she tortured inmates on a daily basis, as well as sent them to their deaths inside of the small gas chamber. For this she was executed in front of thousands, close to the very site where she committed many of her crimes. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.